So while Désirée's joining, I'll do a little introduction of her so she can hear me. So Désirée McGraw, many of you in Montreal West know her as one of those ladies who runs on Tuesdays and Thursdays with Deb and the whole gang. She is, though, has a much broader base than that. She's currently president and CEO of Aqua Forum, which is a new nonprofit. It's run by the De Gaspé-Beaubien Family Foundation, and it raises awareness and kind of seeks solutions to any kind of water issues that we face all across North America. Now, prior to that, she was the first woman to serve as head of Pearson College out in British Columbia on the island there. Prior to that, she was executive director and president of the Jeanne Sauvé Foundation. She has also been senior policy advisor to former Prime Minister Paul Martin and co-founder of Al Gore's Climate Reality Leadership Corps in Canada. And I could go on because her career in philanthropy and in social activism actually started when she was in her teens. But now that she's on with us, I want to get to Désirée to tell her own story. And Désirée, what a great idea for a topic today, pursuing your passion and living a life of purpose. And I want you to tell our audience who may not know how this all started for you.
Hi, well, thank you, Jamie. Let me just start by thanking you for taking on this series of Women in Philanthropy, and also just Deb for conceiving of this idea and for convening all of us. And I just want to say also hello to so many friendly faces, or at least names, because I don't see all the faces, friends and neighbors. So I'm happy to be part of this series with some amazing women, including Rachel Kidd-Monroe, who you heard from last week, and Kate Shingler, who you'll be hearing from next week, and of course, Jamie and Deb. So it all started really in Montreal West, because I live here now. I've just returned here from several years in BC, but I actually was born on Wolseley South and grew up on Strathern North. And then eventually, when we started our own family, we moved from NDG to Montreal West. So it started in Montreal West when I was a high school student at Villa Maria on the French side, and I was involved in debating and debated nuclear disarmament. You have to keep in mind, this is the mid to late 80s, during the end of the Cold War, and studies were showing that 20% of Canadian teenagers by the Canadian Mental Health Association were not planning on getting married or having children because of the threat of nuclear war. So we hear a lot today about the impact of climate change on our young people, and it's very much a real existential threat. And I think many of you will remember that in the 80s, nuclear war was very much an existential threat, a global threat. So I became involved through this debate on nuclear disarmament with an organization called SAGE, Solidarité Anti-Guerre Étudiante, much more elegant than the English version, which is Students Against Global Extermination. And in a nutshell, we were doing presentations to peer-to-peer presentations to high schools in and around Montreal, and eventually started receiving invitations from across the country. And I don't know if you remember a place called McDoherty's Ice Cream. There was one in NDG and one in Westmount. So 4 members of SAGE, myself, Allison Carpenter, Max Spy, and Seth Klein, 4 local teenagers, NDG, Westmount, Montreal West, got together over ice cream and decided we're going to take our show on the road. And we spent the summer organizing it. So we literally traveled we took a year off school. So I just finished high school and literally traveled from Newfoundland to British Columbia, speaking to 1 in 8 Canadian high schools across the country about nuclear disarmament, the threat of nuclear war, and what we as young people could do about it. And the Department of National Defense started a national program promoting nuclear deterrence. So we would often end up debating military generals. And it was a wonderful way to see the country. We stayed in billets with families across the country, and sold pins and t-shirts to fund our tour. We traveled in a gas guzzling secondhand station wagon, which of course we wouldn't do today with climate change. But it was a wonderful way to get to know the country. And I think my big takeaway from that, other than learning so much about Canada, our cities and our communities, was just a sense from a young age that one could really make a difference. And so I developed what I'll call a bias for action from a pretty young age. The National Film Board followed us and made a documentary. We were on the front page of the Globe and Mail. We received a lot of media coverage, and a lot of, we felt we were having impact. The other thing I think I learned from a young age is that it's not enough to share the gloom and doom. If you only talk about the things that are going wrong, people will actually become more disengaged. There was a strong, young people in particular at that time, and even to some extent today, are criticized for being apathetic. But apathy isn't because you don't care. Apathy is because you care and you feel like you can't do anything about it. So from that age, we learned sort of a 50-50 rule, which is 50% is the facts, which can often be discouraging. And then 50% is what you can do about it. So it's 50%, science or facts, 50% solutions. And I've tried to carry that with me, in all of my work, including later on around and more recently around climate change. So the 50-50 rule, but a sense that one can make a difference. And then a lot of us involved in the peace movement, as the Cold War wound down, we became involved in environmental issues, which was the next phase. But I'm going to stop talking and let Jamie tell me if I go on or
I wanted you to keep talking because I just find your story, and I've told you this before, Désirée, so fascinating, because how many of us at that young age can have that level of experience, and it's carried you throughout your whole life. And I love to hear that you word that the way you say that apathy means that you care, but you can't do anything about it. So tell me how you went from there into climate change. I know you studied as well, and then you ended up in the Prime Minister's office. So can you take us through that little? I know it's a quick route.
I did go back to school, just to let everyone know. I was actually a very, very serious student. And unlike a lot of young people today who combine their activism with their academics, I was so serious about both that twice in my life, I took a year off school. So one after high school to do the SAGE tour, and then a few years later in university to get involved in something called the Earth Summit. And I'll come to that in a second. How I got involved in environmental issues was that two of us on the SAGE tour were invited by the National Film Board of Canada to co-host a video series called Alive in the Nuclear Age with David Suzuki. And of course, you can't work with David Suzuki without becoming deeply engaged in environmental issues. And so I made the shift as the Cold War wound down to environmental issues. And myself, and as I say, one of these other team members, a guy named Seth Klein, who just came out with a book called The Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Crisis. We'll come to this. Seth and I, at that point I was 19, I guess he was 21. We thought, oh, we're too old to speak to other high school students. They're not going to relate to us, right? Like we're already of voting age. So, because the peer-to-peer approach is very powerful. And so we thought, well, we're too old. We'll speak to university students, but we will recruit high school students. So at this point, I had just finished SAGE up and he was at U of T and I was still in Montreal. We recruited through this pretty intensive application process, 10 Canadians from across the country, far more representative than the four of us from like NDG, Westmount, Mo West, right? And so we found these 10 amazing young peoples, and that became the SAVE Tour, Student Action for a Viable Environment, or SAUVE, Solidarité et Action Unie vers l'Environnement. And that tour became an ongoing tour, an annual tour. And then there were new students every year who did that for a few years. So from there, I also did something called the International Youth for Peace and Justice Tour, which really actually traveled in Canada's north. And if you heard from Rachel last week, you know how significant the issues are in Canada's north, particularly with our First Nations, and some of the health and educational outcomes are similar, if not worse, in our First Nations than they are in many developing countries. So I was exposed to that at a fairly young age. But then, there was a man named Maurice Strong, who's a great Canadian business person and diplomat. He was the founding head of the UN Environment Program, the founder. He was the global chair of something called the UN Conference on Environment and Development, or the Earth Summit, and a great Canadian. So he appointed me and another young person to be sort of global youth ambassadors to this Earth Summit. So I took another year off school, this time really traveling the globe, talking about the Earth Summit, which led to the Climate Change Convention, which led to the Biodiversity Convention, Forests, an action plan for the 21st century. At the time, it was 1992, it was the largest gathering of governments and media and nonprofit, like not NGOs in Canada, in global history. So it was an incredible experience. I learned about the UN. I had also, been to the UN through this UN special session on disarmament, spent a summer there when I was 18, but really learned about the UN and negotiations. And then that kind of launched the next phase. I then graduated from university and did my graduate studies following global environmental negotiations and working as a UN reporter covering these negotiations for several years to also help fund my graduate studies. So I learned all about the intricacies of climate change negotiations and biodiversity negotiations and ozone and all of these negotiations, and then later lectured on it. And anyway, where I'm trying to go with this is the whole thing became very much an intellectual exercise up until, like, as Jamie mentioned, I was the senior advisor to the Prime Minister on humanitarian intervention and multilateral organizations, and very involved in this Canada's response to the Indian Ocean tsunami. But it became this very academic policy exercise, writing memos, providing advice, reporting, my kind of report, not Jamie's kind of reporting, which is very human, but very like rapportage, and it really engaged my head, but my heart kind of got left behind. And so what happened is in 2005, in the middle of the election, my first son, Jack, was just outside playing street hockey on an online learning day, or actually it's a PED day.
PED day, yeah.
PED day today at Loyola. He was born in the middle of that election. So I knew I wasn't going back to Ottawa because I had been commuting between Montreal and Ottawa for the first year of my marriage and then the duration of the pregnancy. And that was pretty, I think for those of us who have kids or children who are special in our lives, that's a pretty transformative experience. And I've been doing, all this policy work. So a few months in after Jack was born, I was up late one night, as one often is with an infant, watching David Letterman, and Al Gore was being interviewed. And David Letterman said, "So, Mr. Gore, you've been nominated for an Oscar, I guess. You're winning all these accolades for your new documentary called An Inconvenient Truth. How many of you have heard of An Inconvenient Truth? Just raise your hand. So you know about Al Gore's documentary on climate change. And he now has a second one that came out last year. Anyway, I was up late one night watching, and David Letterman said, "What are you going to do for an encore?" And Mr. Gore said, "I'm going to train 1,000 people to give a personalized, localized version of The Inconvenient Truth." And I thought, that's my next move. I'm going to be one of those 1,000 people. A few months later, I went down to Nashville where he was doing the trainings, and I was in the final cohort that met his 1,000 mark. Came back to Montreal, spent the bulk of my maternity leave doing presentations in and around Montreal about climate change and what we could do about it. And realized I couldn't keep up. Like, this issue was exploding, the interest in the issue. This is now 2007. By then, after I'd done the training, and realized I can't keep up, and nor could the other small group of Canadians who had done this training. So we thought, let's bring Al Gore to Canada. So in a few months later, in 2008, we brought Al Gore to Montreal, the Hyatt downtown, and we recruited 250 Canadians from across the country, business, government, nonprofits, teachers, lawyers, doctors, premiers, members of parliament, to come and do the training with Al Gore. And so we launched through that. His project, by the way, to train all of these people is called the Climate Project. Now it's called the Climate Reality Project. But basically, with a couple of other Canadians, we co-founded Al Gore's Climate Reality Project in Canada. And shortly after founding the organization, you also have to know when you found organizations when to step back and let a new generation or new people come on board. So after about a year, I stayed on the board, but we recruited a national manager, a guy named Peter Schiefke, who's now the member of parliament for Vaudreuil-Soulanges, to run the organization. So anyway, I will complete this by saying it was like coming full circle, because having started my I don't want to say career, my vocation, my engagement, because for me, my career and my vocation have been one and the same. And I've been privileged to be able to live a life of really fulfilling my ideals and doing work that is completely aligned with my values. So doing the Gore work was coming full circle because, like when I was a teenager, it was all about the peer-to-peer approach. It was all about engaging your peers, not only in raising attention around, an existential threat, but more importantly, what can we each do about it? And talking to other parents, other Mo Westers. One of my presentations was at the town hall. Other professionals, my church, and doing that very much is sort of the wake up call after Jack was born was, I can't just intellectualize these issues anymore. As, fun as it is to write a memo to the prime minister or write a great report, this is bad. Let's get back to the heart, because actually that's how you engage people. People care about causes and issues, but ultimately what really connects people to causes are other people. It's the stories.
For sure.
And so that was coming full circle for me. And
yeah.
voila.
For sure. Well, I really want to open it up to other people's questions, Désirée, because I know there's probably a million of them. But I want to ask you, after listening to that, and it's not the first time I've heard your story. We've talked plenty about it. But what strikes me about it as I hear you repeating it is how bold you were from a very young age, and all that, you decided, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And every step was quite bold. Where do you think that came from in you, and what advice would you have to some of the people watching about that kind of boldness?
Well, I see that there are a lot of women, at least judging by the names. I think women, I think a lot of people are afraid of failing or messing up, especially if it's public. And I think women are especially so, because many of us are perfectionistic, or we think we have to be twice as good, frankly, to do, we think we have to be twice as good as often men. And so I think that holds us back. I think a big part of it came from, I grew up in a house of all girls. I have an older sister. I went to an all-girls school. I think also I had parents who are and I see Ellen Moore is on the line, good family friends. I had parents, my mother started women's studies at John Abbott, or helped start that program along with others here. And my father was an early feminist. He did all the cooking. In fact, he was on when we were little kids, he was in my late father, I should say, passed away last year, and I miss dearly. My mom is still on Strathern. I think very lucky to have grown up in a house and go to schools where the top of the class was always a girl. So by the time I got to CEGEP and co-ed and university, it didn't faze me. So I think that was a big part of it. And in some ways, I think I had a happy, well-adjusted, safe childhood in Montreal West. I do think that played a part. Like, it felt like a safe place to take risks. I also grew up very much in the wake of these referenda. And I have to say, as someone who's Anglophone, but bilingual, and having studied exclusively in French up until university, I just found the debates kind of depressing. And it's one of the reasons that I engaged in global issues, I think, from a young age, is I wanted to kind of not just be bogged down in the provincial politics. So I think that gave me a sense of wanting to. And then I think, frankly, I was very lucky to have a first experience with change that was positive.
Yeah.
The Sage Tour worked well. It was the ethos of the time. We sort of tapped into something, the Day After movie had come out, and it could have potentially gone badly. I see him look back, I'm like, oh my God, I was 16. My parents let me go across the country and with 3 other teenagers. Like, I don't think I'd let my, kids do that. But I think we were lucky. And I do feel that, we were privileged kids for sure. And we were lucky that our first experience with change was so positive. And so I developed a bias that one could make a difference. In fact, people had to really explain to me real hard, like, why you can't do something. And, like, here's why you can't actually do that. And I think most of us need to be convinced we can. So I just was lucky in many ways to have those early experiences that then just kind of fed on themselves. I haven't told you about all the things I did wrong or all the failures. I've only told you about the good stuff so far, but I'm happy to talk about things that went wrong.
Well, I would love to open it up to questions because I'm sure there are many people who want to ask you stuff. Deb, you want to kick things off, or do you have anybody putting their hands up in front of you?
I don't see anybody, but I'm going to change my view right now.
I can't see.
Oh,
all of them.
Kathy has a question, so I'm going to go to Kathy in Oregon.
Go ahead,
There,
Kathy.
I'm unmuted, I think. Am
Yeah,
I?
you are. Yeah, you're good. Oh, Kathy, you just froze.
Oh,
Canada has never been able to get.
Oh, maybe we're
shoot,
gonna
this
have
sounds real interesting.
Any ideas?
Kathy, I don't know if you can hear me, but you froze. So I wonder if you could put your question in the chat
Or try
and we
again,
can
maybe.
try to address it, or we'll try again. Oh, you're moving now. Do you want to try again?
Hey, I'm not, it's freezing on me too. Is anybody else having that problem? All through. Anyways, my question is about water in the north of Canada. And if you have some ideas of why we can't seem to solve this problem once and for all.
You mean like clean water, like for First Nations?
Clean drinking
communities?
water, yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. And now my work is very much in the field of fresh water and working with young entrepreneurs from across the country to find solutions to these wicked water problems. But again, this sort of goes back, Kathy, to what I was saying earlier on, that we have these health and educational outcomes for many of our Indigenous communities that are worse, similar, comparable, if not worse than many developing countries. I mean, how is it that we have communities in Canada in the 21st century that don't have that? It's not just Indigenous communities, but it's particularly problematic there. Look, as many of these issues are, it's a lack of prioritization and political will. We have the technical solutions, we know how to fix these things, but it's a lack of prioritization of these issues. So it's not a tech fix, it's a political will fix, it's a policy fix. And look, I think, you know, I don't know if you saw some of the protests recently, or some young people from, I'm not going to pronounce it right, the community net, help me out here, the community.
No?
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, we have young people putting up posters saying like water is a human right, and you know, we want access to water. So I think it's part of a larger issue, Kathy, around, frankly, reconciliation with our First Peoples, with Canada's First Peoples. And it's clearly, if the conditions that many First Nations live in were to exist for non-Indigenous communities, or let's just say white communities, there's no way that would be allowed to continue. Like, so I just think underlying a lot of this is, unfortunately, our Indigenous peoples are racialized, and it's part of the larger narrative that we're seeing around racialized communities, or what people often call people of color, but we're all of color, right? So it's communities that by virtue of their race are racialized. So it's not a technical fix, it's a social issue, and it's an issue of justice, and it's just not been prioritized. I hope that is changing. I do see a change in Canada. And I always call myself an operational optimist. That is, that even though you could list the reasons why we should be pessimistic about the future, like intellectually the facts, I choose to be hopeful, because I think being unhopeful or pessimistic becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think we are going in the right direction, but it's taken way too long to get there. So we need to ramp up.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone want to share in chat? I have one for you, if Desiree, if no one else does, but I'm trying to look through.
Jamie, you go, and then
Okay.
after you all go, I have a question.
Well, I was going to ask you, Desiree, about how you do everything, because it's, you know, it's amazing. You know, you have these two children who are about the same age as my children, and you went all the way to BC. You came home. You promised to come home, and you did. Like, how do you manage it all?
Well, first, coming home, I just want to say, nobody believed us. They're like, you're moving to BC and you're coming back to Montreal. Like, nobody does that. Like, people go west and they don't come back. And we're like, but you don't know Montreal West. We're coming back because we are from an amazing community. And that's the truth. And we wanted to be near my mom on Strathern and Chris's mom, who my husband grew up on NDG. So our family's here and this is our home. So that's the first thing. We did come back, and I'm glad we did. And actually being out in BC was an amazing experience, but we didn't have the community support that we have here. So I think part of the first answer to that, Jamie, is it takes a village, right? For all of us. I could throw the same question back at you and probably most of the women on this call. I do believe, you know, I have a saying, it may actually be an Oprahism, but I think it's, you can't have it, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at once, or you can't have it all in one person. So I think as a family, we try to balance these things. So when I moved out to BC, for sure, whereas I had been very much the primary parent, primary caregiver for the first 10 years of my older son, the first 5.5 of my younger son, when we moved to BC and I took on the presidency of the college, which was an all-consuming role, Chris really stepped into that role. And, you know, we kind of try to figure it out together. But I think, you know, I don't think I have, you know, I could give a million examples of, you know, frankly, with COVID and spending so much time as a family, sometimes I say, okay, too much of a good thing, but no, a good thing overall. I'm more cognizant of what I've missed for the last few years because I'm with my boys more now than I was in the last few years out in BC. Ironically, my family moved out there, but you know, the college is 90% scholarship. So I spent most of a lot of my time fundraising for the, you know, the 90% of students on scholarship. And then of course the students were from 100 countries, including refugee camps. So the needs were tremendous. And I wasn't as present to my family as I am now. And I'm more aware, more keenly aware because of COVID of what I missed out on. So I will just be honest about that. I do think women get asked that a lot because somehow we are expected to balance it all. Yeah. Very rarely does a man get asked. So it's a great question. I think we need to be honest about it. I'm not putting the question down. I am saying though that so long as women are expected to figure this all out, like, yeah, I just think that's a no-win proposition. So I think part of it is, if you're going to be in a marriage or a partnership relationship, make sure you choose well, whoever that other person is. If you are going to be, you know, in a relationship, it's probably the most important decision you're going to make, yeah. To do it together. And, you know, I think when you have roles that are not clearly defined, like, you know, in many relationships, you'll have like a primary caregiver and a primary breadwinner. But if you have both people playing those roles overlapping, you have to really constantly communicate and even negotiate. And, you know, we're not perfect in any way, but it makes life interesting. And so I think I'm still learning. And, you know, if you talk to my kids, I don't think they would think that mommy's got it all figured out. But I think one thing I hope I have given to my kids is they're able to see a parent who really lives like that my work is really my vocation, and it's that I do work that I find meaningful and that I care about. Now it's a double-edged sword though, because when you really care about your work, like your job is your vocation, there's no end. And I happen to have chosen issues, whether it's climate change or you know, fresh water now, or frankly working with young, you know, leaders. There's no end in sight. There's no shortage of work to be done. Like, you could just throw everything you have at it, and these are tough issues. So it is kind of hard to put the brakes on. But one of the things I do, I'll just say this is a shout out to Deb and some of the women on the call, is we run together, you know, 2 or 3 mornings a week. And, you know, being multitasking moms, we're like, we get to be, and like socially, physically distant, just putting that out there. Outside, you get to be outside, you get to be with great people, and you get to exercise. So it's kind of finding those things where you can kind of check a few boxes. But I certainly don't have the magic recipe. And I think we have to do it together. And so long as it's up to women to figure it out on our own, that's not going to work. It's not even fair. It's not a fair proposition. So I think it's doing it, you know, ensemble.
Great answer. Great answer. And you're right. Men don't get asked that question. But I think we do have to talk about it as women because it does fall on us a lot of the times. And I think we have to remind each other that it shouldn't be. It really, it's something we should be sharing with our partners more. And our young men, our 15-year-olds. Deb, you had one, I think you said, eh?
Yeah, so I'm interested, Desiree, because it is the couple of things that I've pointed out from your speech that I'm going to take away from it. The bias for action, I love that. I just think that's a really key. And I know when I've seen you speak in public before, you always talk about action as opposed to policy, although you are coming from that policy work. So I really do like that. But I want to bring it down to a little bit of the grassroots here in this community that you love. And I do think, because I work in the community now, I do think this community is on a cusp of some sort of change, and it's always changing. People move in, people move out. They have different issues. What do you think are some of the biggest issues facing Montreal West going into this 21st century?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. Okay, I will just brainstorm here. I mean, just as a resident, I mean, I think for any community in the 21st century is sustainability, and how can we have progressive policies that are forward-looking policies to ensure that we're sustainable. And when I say sustainability, I mean, yes, environmentally sustainable, but also socially sustainable. I will just say, as a mother with a daughter with an elderly mother here in Montreal West, I think we need to do more to support our seniors. And I'm really glad to see, I think while I was away, a lot of work was happening on that front, and I'm happy to see that moving forward, including, I guess there'll be a development of some residents across from the town hall, and I hope that there is some way of prioritizing local seniors in that presumably waiting list that will likely materialize. So sustainability to me is all encompassing, right? There's the social piece. I think there's more we could be doing for our teenagers. I mean, I just remember growing up here, it's a great place to raise a young family. I think it gets trickier for teenagers in Montreal West. I think, you know, of course, COVID's really tough for everyone. And I have to say, you know, as an aside, and I'm biased because my greatest delight is in working with young leaders, particularly young adults, sort of late teens into their early 20s. Like that's just a really exciting, it's why I did at Jan Sovane at McGill, and it's a really exciting age group. I'm still figuring out my kids' age because they're not at that age yet, but I think for young adults with COVID who are, young people are hardwired for innovation. Like neuroscience will tell you that. Now that sometimes is demonstrated in like experimentation that's not always so positive, but they're hardwired for innovation. There's a lot more we could be doing during COVID and to engage our young people in sort of national service and local service and community service. So I think there's more we could be doing in Montreal West, as with many other communities, to connect across generations to really support each other. I think Montreal West is great for young families. It's great for little kids, and that's awesome. Like it's an amazing community. So everything I'm saying is just like how do we make it even better? But I think working across generations and being more deliberate about those opportunities for elderly, but also our young people to serve, who they want to serve. Young people want to serve. How do we create those opportunities? I mean, I'd love to see a national youth service, and I'm sad that the We Charity thing sort of gave a bad name to a lot of that. Happy to talk about the We Charity thing as well, but it's too bad because young people could have been engaged nationally in serving even schools. Like we knew COVID was going to come back in the fall. We knew there's more that could have been like done to like prepare young teachers and recruit young people to like a teaching corps, and in addition to the ventilation system. So that's disappointing. So I think there's more we can be doing to be deliberate about connecting people across generations in service. And then on the environmental front, I know, Montreal is a green community and that we've got green space, and we're very protective of that space. And I think that's an excellent thing. But can we be having like a community challenge around, climate change and friendly competitions around like reducing our carbon footprint, like block by block, right? We have block parties. Okay, let's do like a climate block party. Let's again, virtual right now, but we can be doing this in terms of like, you have, a block could be like, okay, pool together, how much are we what's our carbon footprint? Let's calculate this, or even just, our electricity usage, and then have a friendly competition. And I don't know enough, having just returned. I know there's an environment committee. In fact, I was on the environment committee when I first moved back to Montreal West in 2006. And I know that that's an active community. So I'd have to see more what's happening today. And we just moved back this summer, so I'm not fully up to date as to what the plans are. But many communities have plans that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which have a 2030 deadline. And we could be, there's a whole community focus in sustainable cities and sustainable communities. So I would love to see us pin some of our longer term town planning. It's not that long term, it's the next 10 years, which, we all say has got to be the turnaround decade on climate change. How can we pin some of our plans to these global challenges, but really implement them and adapt them to our local community, and find creative, fun ways to do that? Many schools are doing it, many communities are doing it. So Montreal West, which I always say is a small town, but it's not small-minded. Like the people here come here, I think, because we love the sense of community. Many are, professionals, have really interesting work. It's a diverse, increasingly diverse community, far more diverse when I grew up here. There's so much talent in Montreal West. And, I think we could be drawing on, I think this is great, Deb, that you've got this series and you're tapping into, okay, women in philanthropy. There could be all these different series with, the town, with the library could be running, because there's so many interesting people doing interesting work, either professionally or as volunteers, as parents, whatever it is in this town. So I think there's no shortage of incredible people. And I'd like to see us have a longer term view with a plan that is truly cross-generational. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the recreation facility around the corner, which have been the same since before I was born. So yeah. That's a bit of an issue, having come from BC, where the facilities are very different, very new. So I would love to see a multi-generational, multi-purpose, truly civic center here in Montreal West. And I hope we get some funding from the government for that.
I think Deb mentioned to me that JD, who the camera's not on for you, JD, but I think you have a question.
It's not a mystery. It's Julie Ducharme. Sorry, I just put my initials in.
Julie.
Hi, everybody.
One of my running buddies. And
yeah. So, okay, my question though is, how do we get our teenagers focused a little more altruistically? We know when we get the bug. When they get the bug, they sink their teeth and they really latch on to a cause. But creating that sense of volunteering, giving back, that altruistic bug, if you will, given they're always, you have any ideas? Have you seen it? Like, you've traveled the country now. Like, have you seen ways? Like, I personally do it, because if you emulate, they will follow. But you give them, how do you get them to get the taste for it? Have you seen some creative ideas or creative organizations that have managed to do that for our next generation?
That's a great question. And I'm going to just flag that Julie works for the Royal Bank, and the Royal Bank is one of the major sponsors of Aqua Forum and our Aqua Hacking Challenge. They have a Tech for Nature program, very much focused on, environment and tech. And there's some great, I will say that even those working in the corporate sector, more and more corporations have these CSR plans and these foundations. And so there's the plug I'm making is that one can be in philanthropy, right? Because it's the philanthropy series, Women in Philanthropy, and be working even, in the private sector or any sector, and still tying it back to philanthropic causes. So I just wanted to flag that. I don't think everybody, I guess there aren't any, I thought there may be some Royal West students. So speaking of young people, but my message to youth is always, I think it's always two things, and it's the same for our adults as well. I think when if you find the intersection between what you love and what you're good at, and they're often the same, and you apply that to something you care about, that's the winning formula. So like if you have an athlete, like again, I'm just looking at my kid out. My kids are all from, as my aunt would say, my godmother's like, they're jocks. How did you end up with a couple of jocks? But like, hey, the way to their heart is going to be through sports, right? So it's like, can we have a tournament that, again, not COVID, obviously, COVID limits us quite a bit, I would say for young people, there's two things. And I think it's the same for all of us, but it's particularly pronounced in young people. One, it has to be fun. Their peers. That's why the Sage Tour was like working with 3 really cool people, including Seth Klein, wrote this book, Naomi Klein's older brother, the little known Seth, because it was fun. They were really cool people. I really enjoyed hanging out with them and learning from them. So I think doing things with your friends, right? And doing something together as friends and having fun. It has to be fun if you're going to sustain it. You have to enjoy it. I think the other piece, and this is where we can come in as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, is modeling it. So if you want your kids to get involved in not pushing it down their throats, I don't remember my parents ever pushing it down our throats, but they would host meetings in their home for organizations that they were involved in. And I was quietly taking this in. It came as a big surprise to them, though, when I got involved in Sage. They hadn't expected it. They wouldn't have known that at age 14 or even 15, really 15 when I got involved. So I think our kids are watching us, our grandkids are watching us. So I do think modeling it, like take them to that climate demonstration or watch, political debates, or whether it be in Canada or elsewhere. It's exposing them to these things. And then there's going to be something that sticks that they like doing. So I think it's one, being with your peers and having fun. It has to be fun. It can't be like taking your medicine, because it'll never stick. And then I think it's doing, participating in activities that have a social and environmental dimension, and then just including your kids. It's not easy. I mean, I know but I took my kids, I was involved for quite a while in the Liberal Party. I was the riding president, and I would take them to the Pride Parade march. Justin Trudeau would walk. They got the pictures with the before he was prime minister. But these are things later now that they're like, oh, okay, this is something they can it kind of becomes ingrained, I guess, in a sense. But I just also believe that not I'm giving examples of like marches and policy and politics, because that's what I like. I've always loved that kind of thing, right? Like I was 11, I think watching Ronald Reagan's inauguration. Not that I was a fan of his, but I loved it, right? So, and I can see that in my younger son. He's fascinated by this whole American election. But it has to be something you like. So if you have a kid or a grandkid or whatever who's artistic, it's got to connect to their passion. That's why I'm saying leaving a life of passion. It's not a cookie cutter thing. It's really, what does your child love to do? What does the young person or the young people in your life love to do? And find a creative way to connect it, and then connect with peers who are into the same thing, and then model it. Invite them to things, whether it's watching something on TV, or, as I say, going to a march, or something in your organization, your company that's doing a fundraiser for something. It may not happen overnight. It may not even be obvious, but it does, our kids and our grandkids, the young people in our lives, are hugely, hugely influenced by us. I think
they sure are. Yeah, no, they really are. And it's not easy to model all the time. I hope they don't model everything I do, because none of us are perfect. But you're right. Any little thing you can present them with sometimes will stick if they love it. Deb, you said you had something else.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this conversation, because as an organizer of many different community events, and now here I do organize volunteers, the one thing that I've learned, and I've always learned, is volunteering. It is that you're volunteering. You're giving up your time, and even if they're a youth, they're giving up their time away from whatever device or hockey game or whatever. Is that initially, especially with youth, it's about their experience. It's not even really about them giving back. It's about their experience. So you have to, so it's almost like, when I deal with the high school kids for their community service, it's really not about what they're doing for the library. It's really just so that they enjoy it and that they want to come back. And then you're like, yeah, I have 2 students that always email me now directly. Can I come back and work for you? because that's what I try and do. I give them milk and cookies. I feed them. That's the Italian side of me. Oh, you want people to stay, you feed them, or things like that. But it's just to make it a really positive experience. So they go away thinking, volunteering is great, you know, that they've enjoyed it. And giving them like a specific set of tasks and so that they know what they're getting into. And so it really is about, you know, changing it from that perspective, and especially with the youth, is like giving them things that they can accomplish, and that it's their enjoyment too, and that you're giving them feedback and positive, and so things like that. So it really is about that. That's what the biggest thing I've learned is making it, you know, making it for them initially, and then they get the bug, and hopefully they come back and they give, and then it makes it easier going forward.
Great advice. JD gives you a thumbs up.
My other
Does anybody else have anything they wanted to ask Desiree?
Juliana.
Go ahead, Juliana. Did we unmute Juliana's mic?
Okay, there I am. Here I am.
Okay, good.
Nice to meet you all. And it's getting very cozy with the Zoom in. I've never felt Jamie closer. And my Montreal West residents. So I thank Debbie to get to these wonderful ladies that you've been telling me you've been running with, and you come back and say, I have a great idea. Let's get women in philanthropy. So Debbie has done a great job of trying to get these nonprofits in our town, such as Tracy Swim and in the intergenerational, and the Rotary, which are now trying to start public speaking again. And of course, we have the Edinburgh School, which has a wonderful volunteer program with grades 5 and 6, and they do an outreach. So when you start volunteering when you're young, you end up sort of my age, and you're still volunteering and enjoying it. And the library is a wonderful focal point, I think, to start any program with, and bringing together, as Debbie already has. She's had her first meeting. There were 9 of us there with the Girl Scouts and what have you. And I love your idea about fundraising, because it's a little bit, it's a challenge, and it could be what young folks, they come together and they say, well, let's have a curling club or a driving range, golf course, because we have the Meadowbrooks, and that went through a lot of politics with saving the green space. So I would love to see Debbie continue the library right at the center of it, and maybe even a discussion about how important, how viable the library is going forward. As you know, we're going to a temporary move and then relocating back to our permanent space. So I would hope that Debbie continues with her non-governmental profit and come up with some wonderful fundraiser that many could join in, especially the young.
Thank you, Juliana.
Nice
I
plug.
think that's a great idea. I think you should be recruiting us all to fundraise for you, Deb.
Absolutely. Because what did I learn today? And I'm going to learn more next week, but there's a bias for action. And 2, you know, it's 50% what's wrong, and we know what's wrong with our current library, 50% what we can do about it, and it's the stories we tell. And that's really something that I've taken away from both with Rachel, from Desiree, and with Kate. It's all about our stories. And so I do think this is all helping to percolate. And trust me, you know, when I'm running, I come up with other ideas. You won't believe some of the stuff I've come up with. Some of it is really pie in the sky. But you know what? One thing especially, you know, because I've done some other things with Desiree in the past and running with her, the one thing I've learned is, what's the worst that can happen in anything you try? Really. And at this age in my life, there's nothing really that bad that can happen. So, you know, you just try, and most of the time, I have to say, with people like Juliana and Marlene and Joanna, who are all on my board, we've been, and Kathy, we've been all very successful. So it's, it's all been great.
Awesome. I wanted to give the last word to Desiree on this, and I, you know, not putting you on the spot or anything. I know you've just started a new job, but what do you see you know, to Deb's words there about, you know, you just do it. You got to try. What you know, what do you see for your future? Next 5 years, next 10 years, or you're just living in the moment right now?
I'm you know, after a period of disruption, really, of moving our family, as wonderful as it was, and I learned a ton in that job, and it was an incredible experience for our family to be out west and on this an incredible coastal campus with young people from every province and territory in 100 countries. It was disruptive. And so we're just settling back into Montreal West, and I'm trying to give myself permission to not overdo, right? And get like sign up for this or say yes to that, and actually trying to be more mindful and deliberate and just allow myself this time. Also just, you know, as I say, my father passed away last year. My mom is, you know, thank God is in Montreal West, where there's so many wonderful neighbors, again, like Ellen Moore and others who've been so amazing while we were away and continue to be amazing, like such a great neighborhood and such a great community. So I'm actually giving myself permission to not think too far ahead, to try to be a little bit more in the moment, enjoy my family in this weird COVID time, and learn, like learning a ton about freshwater and learning about tech and learning about entrepreneurship. But I do think ultimately, you know, it is about taking risks, calculated risks. And, you know, for me anyway, and again, I think many of us, people in general, but I think probably especially women, we're afraid to fail, especially if it's in a public way. Like we don't, it's like we associate failure with something negative, as opposed to like trying something, okay, I'm going to fix that because I didn't quite get it right. And so I think it's kind of overcoming that, but it's tough. I think it's tough for most people. And I think probably, again, just having had that experience from a young age, it kind of gave me a different perspective, again, that I feel very lucky to have. And so I believe very strongly, I guess as a closing, whatever I do, Jamie, I believe very strongly in working across generations. I particularly love working with young people. It is fun. It has to be fun to engage them. It can never be about lecturing. It can never be about paying lip service or passing the buck. So I, as someone who was a young activist myself, who works with young people now and continues to work with young people, you know, they see through it. So I don't believe that the issues that are facing our planet, particularly climate change, we don't have the time for young people to to be in positions of leadership. My generation, those who come before us, need to step up. So yes, working with young people and having fun as much as possible while we do it, but all of us figuring out how we can be of service, frankly, to the planet right now, because I do believe climate change is the single issue that trumps, or lack of a better term, really everything else. It really is an existential issue. And so I am optimistic that we will address it. We will find a way forward urgently. And maybe to end with like you know, Deb keeps coming back to bias for action. I do believe in that, but I also ultimately believe in, you know, our responsibility, because we have the ability to respond. And I know Montreal West is a diverse community, but we are privileged. Most of us are privileged, and we need to use that privilege in terms of access to education, you know, safety, a safe community, access to networks, access to influence. The access we have and the position of privilege that we hold to create change. And that really is, so I think whatever I do next, as I do now, it will be very much informed by my passion for, you know, a sustainable planet and, you know, social justice and, you know, service in you know, different forms. And hopefully, you know, having some fun and hanging out with my family and my friends and going for some good runs in Mo West, walking the dog.
Well, I look forward to seeing what you do next. I know Deb has a few closing statements, but it's been a real pleasure, Desiree. Well, I love talking to you. I could talk to you all day, every day. So thanks.
I love talking to you, Jamie. It's great. I want you to be, we're going to have to interview you next time to hear
Oh, God.
all the amazing things you're up to.
There you go.
Absolutely, Jamie, you're on my list. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today. I want to especially thank Jamie and Desiree for doing this and for being so supportive of me when I come up with these ideas. And that's basically to everybody around this room, that everybody's been extremely supportive. So I'd like to thank that. I'd also like to remind everybody that next week we have Kate Shingler coming, and she will be talking about how telling a compelling story is essential to connecting with the cause. And I think this just builds on what we've been listening to throughout. And so I'm looking forward to that next week, and it's Monday at 12:30. I'd like to thank everybody because as you know, this is mostly just a manual process, and we're learning new tricks and things as we go forward, doing more and more of these Zoom things. So I think you'll see a few more of these coming forward in the new year. But as I'd like to mention, we are moving. So yeah, I'm packing. I'm packing. That's what I do. And just trying to figure out how we're going to move everything in the least disruptive manner to our members and to you. So we're going to be doing a lot of virtual things in the interim as we go through our move. So to keep us alive in the community. So that's it for today. Thank you very much again, Jamie, Desiree. It's been great, and thank all of you for attending. And I hope to see you next week. Thank you.